It was the 11th of April, 1993. The sky over Donington Park sat low and gray, the kind of English morning that doesn't threaten rain so much as simply deliver it, quietly and without warning, as if the weather itself had decided the day's outcome long before the engines started. 50,000 people stood pressed against the barriers, collars up, breath steaming. They had come to watch the fastest machines on Earth chase each other through damp curves in the English Midlands. Most of them were hoping to witness something good. None of them were prepared for what was about to happen, because in the space of one single lap, 4.02 kilometers of tarmac, slick with mist and cold and danger, one man was going to do something so far beyond the limits of what was considered humanly possible that people who watched it live still struggle to explain it 30 years later. Not as a memory, as a feeling, as the sudden and irreversible understanding that they had witnessed something that would never happen again. If these stories speak to something inside you, consider subscribing. Every week there's a new one, and they only get deeper from here. Michael Schumacher was 23 years old that weekend and already feared. Not respected the way veterans are respected, not admired the way legends are admired, feared the way people fear someone who has not yet found the ceiling of his own ability. He had finished third in his very first full Formula One season in 1992, driving for Benetton, a team that was fast but not dominant. He had already shown the paddock something unsettling, a coldness under pressure that most drivers take years to develop, and some never develop at all. He was methodical, relentless, and in the wet, genuinely dangerous. Rain didn't shake him. It sharpened him. In the damp qualifying session the day before the race, Schumacher had posted the third fastest time, behind only the two Williams drivers. For a Benetton powered by a Ford V8, that was extraordinary. His car was giving away something close to 100 horsepower to the Williams Renaults of Alain Prost and Damon Hill. And yet, there he was, third on the grid, separated from the front row by a margin that felt, in the circumstances, almost like nothing. Ayrton Senna was fourth, 1.649 seconds off Prost's pole time in the dry. In Formula One, that is not a gap. It's a canyon. The Williams FW15C was not merely a fast car. It was an engineering argument made in carbon fiber and electronics, fitted with anti-lock brakes, traction control, hydropneumatic active suspension, a 6-speed semi-automatic gearbox, and a Renault V10, producing close to 780 horsepower. Senna's McLaren MP48 had some of those systems, in simpler form, and a Ford engine producing somewhere around 700 horsepower. On paper, he was bringing a sharp knife to a gunfight. Senna had finished second in South Africa and won in Brazil earlier that season, but Prost had won the opener, and the Williams was simply faster everywhere that could be measured. Senna knew it. He had spent the winter fighting with McLaren and Ford, demanding better equipment, making his frustration with the power deficit no secret in the paddock. He was 33 years old, a three-time world champion, and he was watching the best years of his career pass inside a car that couldn't match the best team in the paddock on raw pace. He needed conditions where raw pace was the smallest part of the equation. He was about to get them. When the lights went out on that Easter Sunday afternoon, the track surface was damp. Not soaked, not dry. That miserable in-between state where the grip level changes corner to corner, and every decision about where to brake and where to turn is a small gamble. Schumacher, starting third, made his move immediately. As the cars launched toward the first corner, he swung his Benetton left and physically blocked Senna, pushing the McLaren toward the pit lane exit and the grandstand barrier. It was a calculated, ruthless thing to do. Exactly the kind of move that had already made Schumacher famous and, to some, notorious. It cost them both time and position. Karl Wendlinger, the Austrian driving for Sauber, jumped from fifth to third in the chaos, slotting neatly into the gap that the confrontation had opened. Senna found himself fifth, behind Schumacher, behind Wendlinger, behind Hill, behind Prost. The race was 2 seconds old, and already everything had gone wrong. What happened next is not easy to describe in words, which is probably why people keep trying. Senna didn't hesitate. There was no moment of recalibration, no pause to assess the situation. He simply drove. At Redgate, the third corner, he was already alongside Schumacher on the inside, carrying more speed than should have been possible given the conditions, and Schumacher, who had just finished pushing Senna toward a concrete wall, had no answer for it. The McLaren came past the Benetton as though it were stationary. One down. Wendlinger was next, and this is the moment that separates what Senna did that day from anything that had come before. Instead of following the conventional line down the Craner curves, the fast, downhill, terrifying section of the track where every instinct tells you to hug the inside, stay on the racing line, keep the tires loaded and predictable, Senna went to the outside. He drove around the outside of a Formula One car on one of the fastest sections of the circuit, on a damp track with almost no visibility through the spray, at a speed that made experienced engineers watching from the pit wall go quiet. Wendlinger never saw it coming because no one would have looked for a pass there. 2 down, Hill was ahead now, and Senna was on him before they reached McLane's corner, the long uphill section where the track climbs away from the valley floor. He took Hill cleanly, confidently, as though the Williams Renault, the most technologically advanced racing car ever built at that point in history, was simply an obstacle to be moved around, rather than a machine that had been 0.6 of a second per lap faster in qualifying. 3 down, and now it was only Prost. The Frenchman, who had won the first race of the season in South Africa, who had 4 world championships to his name, who was driving arguably the best car in the history of the sport to that point, led the European Grand Prix with Ayrton Senna directly behind him and closing. They reached the Melbourne hairpin, the penultimate corner on the lap, and Senna simply outbraked him. The McLaren dove to the inside, the braking point impossibly late, the grip somehow there when it shouldn't have been. And Prost had no answer. 4 down. Ayrton Senna crossed the start-finish line to complete lap 1 in first place. He had started 5th. He had been blocked by Schumacher. He had fallen to last of the top group, and he had passed 4 drivers: Schumacher, Wendlinger, Hill, and Prost, drivers who collectively held 7 Formula One World Championships between them, in the space of one single lap. The crowd noise at Donington that afternoon, in that moment, was described by those who were there as something more than just noise. It was the sound of people trying to process something their eyes had told them, but their minds weren't quite ready to accept. In the Ferrari garage, a mechanic turned to the engineer next to him and said nothing. There was nothing to say. In the Williams pit wall, Patrick Head, the team's technical director, a man not given to sentiment or dramatic expression, stood with his arms at his sides and watched Senna's lap time appear on the timing screen. By the exit of the first lap, Senna was already 4.2 seconds ahead of Prost. By lap 2, the gap was growing. Not slowly, quickly. Schumacher held on for several laps, managing his tires, reading the conditions, doing everything right. But the gap between himself and the McLaren ahead kept stretching. He was driving precisely, intelligently, with the clinical focus that would later make him the most decorated driver in Formula One history. And it wasn't enough. Not that day. not anywhere close. Schumacher eventually finished 6th, having made several pit stops in the changeable conditions. He crossed the line and saw the race result on the timing display. Senna, 1st. Hill, 2nd, more than 1 minute and 23 seconds behind. Prost, 3rd, having been lapped. Everyone except Hill had been lapped by Ayrton Senna, driving an underpowered McLaren in the wet at Donington. There is a difference between being fast and being from somewhere else entirely. Schumacher, who would go on to win 7 world championships, who would break record after record, who would become the defining driver of his generation. Schumacher was fast. Senna, in the rain, at Donington, on that April afternoon, was somewhere else. These are not the same thing. Emerson Fittipaldi, the Brazilian double world champion who watched the race on television from his home in Miami, called Senna the next day. He had one thing to say. "Ayrton, that lap is impossible." He recalled Senna's response as a small laugh, embarrassed but happy. A year later, Senna was gone. In the years after Donington, Schumacher would speak of Senna carefully, the way people speak about things that change them permanently. He acknowledged Senna's skill without reservation. He called him the greatest he had ever faced. There is something in that acknowledgement that goes beyond politeness. Schumacher was not a man who paid compliments easily or for effect. He was a competitor in the most complete sense of the word. Someone for whom conceding anything cost something real. When he said Senna was on a different level, he was telling the truth. And the truth cost him something to say. Because Schumacher had come into Formula One believing that with enough work, enough preparation, enough intelligence and will, he could be the best. Donington, 1993, taught him something more complicated than that. It taught him that there are levels of human performance that exist outside the normal architecture of effort and talent. That some things are not the result of working harder or thinking clearer, but of something stranger and more fundamental that no one has ever quite been able to name. The race at Donington was never held again. Formula One moved the European Grand Prix to the Nürburgring in 1994 and never came back to the little circuit in Leicestershire. Which means that the only thing Donington Park ever contributed to the permanent record of Formula One history is that one April afternoon, in the damp and the gray and the noise, a 33-year-old Brazilian in an underpowered car did something on the opening lap that the sport's greatest engineers, analysts, and competitors have been trying to fully explain ever since. They have not succeeded. The data is clear. The lap time is on record. The footage exists. And still, somehow, the question remains, how did he do it? How did he find that much grip, that many overtaking positions, that level of commitment and precision and timing on a cold, damp track in the opening minute of a Formula One race? Fittipaldi said it was impossible. He wasn't speaking loosely. He was speaking accurately. Senna himself, when asked about that day, about that lap, about what it felt like to pass 4 world-class drivers in a single circuit tour, gave an answer that was simple and complicated at the same time. He said that in those conditions, he could feel things in the car that he couldn't describe. He said the wet made everything more honest, that the rain took away the machinery and left only the driver. He said he felt, in the rain, that he understood something about the car and the track, and the moment that other people didn't understand. He never said it arrogantly. He said it the way someone states a fact they've spent a long time looking at from multiple angles and has finally accepted as true. There are things in sport that get called legendary because enough time passes and the narrative takes shape and the story gets told often enough that it takes on weight. And then there are things that are legendary from the moment they finish, while the crowd is still making noise, and the engines are still winding down, and no one has yet had a chance to collect themselves. Donington, Lap 1, 1993. That belongs to the second category. It didn't need time to become what it was. It was already what it was while it was happening. And the people watching it knew it. And the people who weren't there knew it when they saw the footage. And 30 years later, a first-time Formula One fan can watch it for the first time and feel the same thing the crowd felt that day. The shock, the silence before the roar, the sudden awareness that they are watching something that will not happen again. Schumacher went on to become the greatest champion Formula One had ever seen up to that point. 7 titles, 91 wins, record after record dismantled and replaced with his name. He built himself into something almost incomprehensible in its consistency and dominance. And in all of that, through all of it, through every championship and every lap record and every moment of ruthless brilliance, he carried with him the memory of a damp April afternoon at a small circuit in England, where a man in a McLaren drove past him in the third corner and then disappeared into the spray and kept going until there was no one left in front of him. That is the difference between the present and the master. Both live in the same sport, breathe the same air, drive on the same tracks. But one of them, on certain days, in certain conditions, is operating in a place the other cannot reach. And the student, if he is honest, and Schumacher was always honest about this, knows it. He sees it happen, and he knows it. And he carries that knowledge forward, and it shapes everything that comes after. Not as failure, as direction, as proof that there is always something further out there, something beyond the edge of what you've already found. And the only reasonable response is to keep driving toward it. Senna, for as long as he raced, was always further out, always in the rain, always just ahead, in the spray, unreachable and gone.